fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help when you need it, so your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations.
This episode discusses crime scenes, murder, and details of a homicide investigation. Listener discretion is advised. This is The Fall Line. When I first heard about everything they missed, I was struck by the premise. A finance professional with no journalism background deciding to investigate a 17-year-old murder case that everyone else seemed ready to forget. In 2007, Danny Rex Harris, a 55-year-old Air National Guard veteran with 30 years of service and a father of 4, was brutally murdered in his Cordova, Tennessee apartment. According to the Commercial Appeal, quote, Harris's body was found October 26, 2007, in the bedroom of his Woodchase apartment unit some 2 months after he was killed. His pacemaker stopped on August 20th. The brutality of the crime became clear during trial when bloody evidence was brought into the courtroom. Andrew Wayne Hayes, a young man with an intellectual disability, confessed to the crime. As the Commercial Appeal reported, quote, defense attorneys, however, contend that a battery of detectives bullied Hayes into making a false confession. Detective Sergeant Bart Ragland testified that Hayes, quote, initially denied any involvement before then confessing to the crime. Hayes was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. The case became more complicated when Harris's associate, Tammy Vance, later confessed to the murder herself, identified Hayes as her accomplice, but then recanted and blamed her daughter, Sarah Lucas. While Andrew sat in prison, the Tennessee Innocence Project became involved in his case. And that's how it came to the attention of Stephanie Tinsley, a former finance professional with a background in litigation, who'd stepped away from her career to support her husband Mark, a trial attorney who represented the Mallory Beach family in their lawsuit against the Murdaughs. The Murdaugh case, involving the 2021 murders of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh and the conviction of the family patriarch, Alec Murdaugh, had drawn national attention and concluded with Alec Murdaugh's life sentence in 2023. After that high-profile case concluded, Stephanie was looking for a new purpose when she started looking into Andrew's case and became convinced that something had gone terribly wrong. What she found was a confession full of factual errors, physical evidence that didn't match, and investigative missteps that seemed almost impossible to believe. Stephanie decided to conduct her own investigation and to document it as a podcast. Everything They Missed follows her ongoing work as she uncovers new evidence, tracks down witnesses who were never interviewed, and builds a case that the wrong person is serving life in prison. I wanted to talk with Stephanie about what it's like to take on a case like this, how her professional background prepared her for investigative work, and what she's discovered about a murder that happened over 15 years ago. Listening to Everything They Missed, I was struck by how naturally Stephanie seemed to take to investigative work. There's real professionalism to her approach that doesn't feel like someone's first rodeo. As someone who also came to podcasting from a completely different career, I was curious about how her background in finance and litigation might have actually prepared her for this kind of investigation in ways that she didn't expect. I asked her to explain how her background informed her work on the podcast.
I started my career with a sales background and eventually landed in a career that finance kind of dominated what I was doing. And the way all that relates is I had been working with startup companies. I was in venture capital and I was raising money for startup companies. And so I was constantly pitching startup companies to investors. And it was very important to me when I was talking to investors or meeting with entrepreneurs that I could connect with them. And in anything that I was doing during that time, if I didn't make the person comfortable that was sitting in front of me, we weren't going to have a good conversation. And so I learned very early on, I started studying body language. And what I learned from that is if I'm sitting down in front of a person and I'm pitching this company, this startup idea. And the entrepreneur is sitting next to me and I'm pitching for him. If I don't make everybody in the room comfortable, then nothing is going to get done. We're not going to get the $500,000 or $1 million that we're sitting there pitching for. A lot of it became instinctual, but at the very beginning, I took a long time studying body language. And I had a coach who's also a body language expert for the FBI. His name is Scott Rouse. And Scott had taught me a lot of things about how people's eyebrows will flicker, how someone is sitting, how if they're leaning in, if they're leaning out. And I could adjust how I was talking or speaking by reading the people. And I did that over the course of about 10 years. I was in this field. And I think that specifically, now that I'm looking back on the interviews that I have done during the season of Everything They Missed, that helped tremendously when I was sitting down with people, because you're sitting down with victims, you're sitting down with victim families, you're sitting down with attorneys, and all of these are different kinds of people. So I would have to adjust myself in different ways. So that was a piece that I didn't realize was very transferable. Before I married Mark, I was a single mom for a very long time. And if I didn't work, if I didn't make something happen, I wasn't putting food on the table. So I think that sheer determination of, I want to do this has to work, also came across in that. And I had fallen back on, okay, what are some of the things that I knew that I was doing back then that I've got to do now? And so, it's interesting because you'd think that doing a podcast, doing an in-depth look at a murder case, you really need to be trained in journalism or in reporting. And in my case, I really found out that you didn't at all. And in fact, I think it was because I didn't have that formal journalism skills to fall back on, that I was relying on pure instinct. And so I think that's why the story sounds like it does. I think that's why it unfolds from episode to episode, is it's just this very instinctual thing that I was doing. And also the confidence that I felt like I could do this. And because I had kept it private for so long, I hadn't told my husband I was doing it. I hadn't told anybody that I was doing it. When it came out on September 5th, almost everyone in my life was surprised and didn't know. And because I had kept it so private, it gave me the ability to design something that I wanted to design without the fear of anybody saying I couldn't do it, because I'm not telling anybody I'm doing it. So if it doesn't work, no one's going to know. And so that too gave me the freedom, the privacy of it, and how private I tend to be gave me a lot of freedom to design it how I wanted it to sound. And to talk to the people. There was a lot of dangerous people I talked to. So having that ability of being able to kind of move a little stealthily allowed me to talk to a lot of people that probably others would have told me were too dangerous to talk to.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles McKenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip: when it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
I wanted a case to find me. I didn't want to force it. And when I was setting out the Alex Murdaugh murders, the trial, all of the stuff that my husband had gone through, because I was coming out of that time period, I didn't want to do anything related to that. And I have grown up in Tennessee. I'm a Tennessee girl. And I wanted to do something that was in the state of Tennessee. I wanted to do something that I could drive to, because I want to show up in person. It's important for me to sit down in front of people. So it needed to be within driving distance of Nashville, where I spend half of my time. I spend the other half in Allendale, South Carolina. So those were some conditions. It needed to be a Tennessee case. And then I really just kind of sat back and was hoping something would find me. I'm one of those people that I don't believe in coincidences. I believe if you say something into the world and you really believe it's going to happen and you start taking steps toward it, it's going to happen. And one day my son, this is in episode 1, I believe, the week that I really started looking for a case, my son Nathan gets in the car and starts talking about his friend that had gotten up during school assembly and was talking about Jason Gishner and the Innocence Project.
At first, Stephanie hesitated about diving into a wrongful conviction case. She'd been consuming true crime content since the 80s, and she was drawn to unsolved mysteries, cold cases where she felt that she might help a family who'd been waiting to finally see some movement. But her son seemed passionate, so she decided to reach out to the Tennessee Innocence Project and to Jason Gishner.
And Andrew Hayes' case was one of his new clients. And when he turned the screen around on his desk and started laying this out to me, and then he played the tape that you hear at the top of episode 1, the tape of Sarah Lucas, I couldn't let it go. As soon as I heard that voice, as soon as I saw the new evidence that he found, I thought, this is it. And there was no going back. Unfortunately, because it's open litigation, the Innocence Project had never, ever let any media cover an open case. And I was wanting Jason to open everything up to me, give me full access to him, his attorneys, the case. And so he said that he would, but I would have to sign an agreement. And what that agreement would state is he could shut the production of my show down at any time. So that's not an ideal way to start a show because, as you know, it's production of podcasts can be not only time consuming, but expensive. And I was giving him the opportunity to shut it down. But I believed in this case. I believed in what they were doing. I believed that this Sarah Lucas needed to be investigated more. And if I wanted to do this, I had to enter into this agreement with him. So I did. I started in August of 2024. In November of 2024, something happened and he shut it down. And I thought, oh my God, all of this work that I've done, what am I going to do? But I convinced him to let me keep going. And that's why you hear it today.
What were some of the things that immediately stood out to you to say, this is a case that I need to take on, to further explore, to look at all of the pieces, to look at what they missed?
Well, the first thing that stood out was the interrogation itself. So Andrew was pulled back into an interrogation room. He has a 62 IQ, and he went into a 27-hour interrogation. 27 hours to anybody would, and you trust authority figures, you trust the police. So the fact that he confessed after 27 hours in an unrecorded interrogation, even though Tammy's was recorded the night before, Andrew's wasn't recorded, and that he confessed to 3 specific things: hitting Danny in the back of the head 2 weeks ago on the second-story apartment. None of that matched the evidence. So that was the first thing that stuck out in a legal aspect of how would a prosecutor move forward with a confession that matched no evidence at the scene. That makes no sense to me. Prosecutors should do better and know better. So that really got under my skin. And when I looked at the other evidence that the Innocence Project had collected, cell phone data, affidavits from family members who had heard Sarah Lucas brag about the murder, all of this evidence that was pointing towards Tammy and Sarah, nothing pointing toward Andrew. So that couldn't be ignored. And then the fact that Danny Harris, the victim, 2 of his sons are in law enforcement, yet it was one of the quickest investigations to be closed. And you would think with 2 sons in law enforcement, it would be a very meticulous investigation. It was wrapped up in less than 2 days. No DNA was collected. Little fingerprints were collected. Why? Why? So those were the things that just stood out to me of, okay, this isn't just an emotional decision for me. This is an analytical decision. How can you let this go?
One of the things that I found really interesting when I was listening were the parallels you drew to other cases people might be more familiar with, like Amanda Knox. She has written and spoken very eloquently about how hard it is to withstand a police interrogation that goes on for over a day.
Yes. So Andrew offered his first confession, written statement, about 12 hours in. And so Andrew, after several hours, just started saying, "What do you want me to say? What do you want me to say?" They'd shown him crime scene photos. The first statement that he offered was not that he had killed Danny. It was that he was there. The police had told him, and again, Andrew's got no experience with the police at all. The police had told him, "We've got your DNA, we've got eyewitnesses." And at that point, like Amanda Knox was tortured over the course of 5 days, and she too was shown crime scene photos. She too was at a point like Andrew, that you're in this room with no windows. You feel like you have absolutely lost touch with reality, and your mind plays tricks on you. And like Amanda, Andrew started thinking, was I there? Did I do this? And like Amanda Knox, after several hours and had been shown more crime scene photos after his first statement wasn't good enough, wasn't close enough, they showed him more crime scene photos. And by the time 27 hours when he gave his second confession, it still didn't match. It was closer than before. But it is, case after case of these false confessions are like that. And the Reid technique is one that you will hear a lot. I shut the production of my show down for 2 months to study police interrogation tactics because I wanted to understand them better. And it was important for me not to condemn the police, but to understand. So I wanted to understand what the Reid technique was. The Reid technique was born out of the third degree, which most of us don't know what the third degree was. Do you?
Only because of this work.
Yeah. So the third degree, for listeners that don't know, is physical abuse. It's what happened in the 1920s and 30s and 40s. The police would give you the third degree. They would beat the confession out of you. Over time, what has been developed and what the Reid technique has developed is more of psychological manipulation. So instead of beating someone, it's psychological manipulation. And if you're someone like Andrew Hayes and you trust the police, that kind of manipulation, that kind of training that the police have experience in can lead to planting ideas in your head, can lead to contamination. And if confessions or if interrogations are not recorded, it doesn't give the police the opportunity to go back and review to make sure, did we plant that idea in his head that the red rag was in his mouth, or did he come up with that on his own? Did we plant that he was hit in the back of the head, or did he come up with that on his own? What the Reid technique and the Reid Institute will tell you is that you shouldn't interview somebody for 27 hours. So they will say things have been done that aren't the Reid technique. And so there's a lot of controversy there that police will say they are using the Reid technique. In fact, in Andrew's case, in trial testimony, one of the cops said he was using the Reid technique when in fact he wasn't. They had gone so overboard that it was no longer the Reid technique. But it is these interrogation tactics that they use that lead to the false confessions. Tennessee is one of 20 states that's not required to record interrogations. And if more states were required to do it, I feel like we would see less false confessions.
I would actually like to move back just a little bit and talk to you about just the circumstances that struck me so hard when I was listening to the podcast about how Andrew Hayes ended up in that interrogation room in the first place? Because the confluence of events, I had rarely heard something like that before.
Yes. I mean, it was just a tragedy from the word go. So the police had gone to the home where Andrew was living to collect evidence. Andrew was living at the time with Tammy Vance and Sarah Lucas. And there was evidence, there was some of Danny's stolen belongings at that house. So Andrew was giving two other women that lived at the house rides to the police station. He wasn't a witness, he wasn't a suspect. He was only giving two women a ride to the station. So, first, just let that sit with you, because if he never would have been nice enough to give someone a ride to the station, he wouldn't be where he is today. So, he gives these women a ride to the station. And when he gets there, the police had already heard the name Wayne Bobo from another suspect. When Andrew was sitting in the police waiting room and one of the officers asked his name, he said, "I go by Wayne," because his middle name is Wayne. Now, if I was a detective and I had just heard the name Wayne Bobo and then I heard someone else say Wayne, my attention probably would be piqued. But it was clear that Wayne Bobo was a real person. They had already gone out to look for Wayne Bobo. The last known whereabouts for him was a place called Lighthouse Ministry. So they were on their way to Lighthouse Ministry. But because they felt like Andrew Wayne was acting nervous, they pulled him back to interview him. And again, Andrew with a 62 IQ, who's nervous around authority figures, acting nervous, his interview quickly became an interrogation. He didn't know what waiving Miranda rights meant. He didn't know that when you waive Miranda rights, the police are allowed to lie to you. I'm not sure I knew that before I started all this. And I have been in law. So I don't think I understood the full impact of what police can do. So that is a simple ride to the police station, trying to help, trying to give answers, trying to be helpful, is what ended up in a 27-hour interrogation where Andrew is just pleading, "Tell me what you want me to say," thinking it's all going to be sorted out. And that's what has landed him in jail for the last 18 years.
The circumstances that put Andrew Hayes into that interrogation room were shocking enough. But learning about what happened at his trial was even more infuriating.
I met Andrew before I read the trial transcripts. So I had a live human being that I had met before I started reading it. So it wasn't just words on a paper. The first thing that struck me was the fact that they brought Andrew out in jail scrubs, not street clothes, jail scrubs. That rarely happens. And I have sat on a jury before of an attempted murder trial, and the young kid came out in regular clothes. I can't imagine if somebody came out in jail scrubs, what do you think automatically? That he's guilty. He's already in prison clothes. So that was the first thing that struck me, is how did his attorney let that happen? The fact that his attorney allowed him to testify is so beyond. And it's one of the reasons why in episode 4, you hear our beloved Judge Newman at the Alex Murdaugh trial. Judge Newman stopped the trial. When Dick Harpootlian told Judge Newman, "Alex wants to testify," if you remember, Dick got up and said, "He's hurting my feelings." I mean, he said something really funny, but he said, "He's not taking my advice. He's hurting my feelings, and he's going to testify anyway." And Judge Newman stopped everything and told Alex again and again and again, "You don't have to testify. Do you know what this means?" They didn't do that for Andrew. No one did that for Andrew. And I've asked him later, "Did you realize you didn't have to testify?" He didn't know he didn't have to testify. All he knew is his attorney's telling him to get up there. And I've interviewed 6 of the 12 jury members, and they all remember this 18 years later. They all remember. And a couple of them said, "We thought Andrew was not guilty until we saw him testify," because the prosecutor was good and made Andrew lose his cool. So that stood out to me, and just Those few things alone, being in jail scrubs, testifying, not having experts called on your behalf. The state called 14 witnesses. The defense called 4. It was just from the beginning, the cards were stacked against Andrew. I believe if I'm going to point fault at somebody for Andrew testifying, it's the judge.
Disability rights advocates have long raised concerns about how people with intellectual disabilities are treated within the criminal justice system, and Andrew Hayes' case illustrates many of these documented problems. According to a joint statement from the American Association on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities and the ARC, people with intellectual disabilities are particularly vulnerable to, quote, giving incriminating statements or false confessions because the individual is manipulated, coerced, misled, confused by either conventional or inappropriately used investigative techniques, or desires to please the questioner, end quote. They often face, quote, waiving rights unknowingly when warnings such as Miranda are given without accommodating the person's IDD, end quote. The organizations recommend that individuals with intellectual disabilities should have, quote, an advocate in addition to their lawyer who has specialized disability-related expertise and have access to and the right to present expert evaluations and testimony by professionals with training, experience, and expertise in their disability, end quote. The statement emphasizes that, quote, as a suspect, they should be protected from harm, self-incrimination, and exploitation at all stages of an investigation and prosecution, including when they are questioned, detained, and incarcerated, end quote. Andrew Hayes, diagnosed with an intellectual disability since childhood, he received none of these protections. It's one of the many issues in his case, a case that was problematic from the moment that he stepped into that interrogation room. One of the most striking aspects of Stephanie's investigation was her success in tracking down 6 jurors from Andrew's trial. That was no small feat nearly 2 decades later. She spoke to them about their experience on the trial and what made them vote the way that they did.
So I'll start off by saying trials are terrifying. Juries are terrifying because they're people. And I have sat on a jury trial before. What struck me with this particular jury, and the reason that I wanted to find these jury members is because I had so many questions about how did this happen? I read the trial transcripts and I don't think I would have voted guilty. So how did this happen? So I hired my own private investigator to find these jury members because I had reached out. I had obtained a list and I had the names. And I was just going on Facebook looking for these people and I wasn't getting anywhere. So I hired my own private investigator who lives in Memphis. He goes by the name of Q. You hear him in episodes, I think 5 and 6. He is amazing and he tracked these people down. What we found was the jury had been sequestered. And in Memphis, almost all murder trials have sequestered juries, which seems crazy to me, how expensive, how crazy. The only thing that I've heard that makes sense is there's so much gang activity in Memphis that it is for the protection of the jury. So if you're thinking about strikes against a defendant, in my opinion, that's strike one, is you're taking people away from their homes, you're sequestering them, you're taking them away from their children, from their jobs, from their beds, from their sleeping habits, from their loved ones. And so you're putting them in a situation from day one, they're ready to go home, in my opinion. So that was the first strike. So when we started talking to some of the jury members, they all collectively felt the words trauma was used, the words anxiety were used, because none of them had been in an experience like this before. I talked to one woman who fully admitted that she had talked to her roommate the night before deliberations and talked about what they were going to vote, which is jury misconduct. And I have presented that to the Innocence Project in part of my findings that that's certainly jury misconduct. It's not enough to get Andrew a new trial. But the same woman who discussed her vote with her roommate also decided to change her vote at the last minute to go with the group because she wanted to get home to her birthday party. When we talked about it years later, she cried. She realized the weight of what she had done. She wanted to know if there was any way that she could help Andrew at this time. But I think juries perhaps don't fully accept the weight of what they are doing. And at least the jurors that I talked to went along to get along, is kind of the old Southern way that my grandmother would say it, because there were some very dominant jurors that were very convincing. And when you're, one of 3 or 4 holdouts and you want to go home too because it's a Saturday and you just, decide to vote guilty, you don't fully understand what's happening. And from everything that I understand now, that's exactly what happened, is these jurors didn't take their oaths as seriously as they should have, and they are devastated for it. So I'm not here to blast them, because you'll hear in episode 4, and later you'll also hear it in later episodes when we talk to them a little bit more in depth. They are very devastated at their verdict. But, I think that you serve on the jury and then you just go on to your life and never think about it again, unless someone like me comes knocking on your door and makes you think about it.
Throughout our conversation, I kept mentioning all the people Stephanie had interviewed. But what struck me was how hands-on her approach had been. This isn't someone who's just making phone calls from home. She's been traveling to Memphis, knocking on doors, and doing the kind of face-to-face investigating that's become less common in podcasting. So I asked her about that choice.
I have always loved people. And I was one in the pandemic that was so sad about Zoom and so sad about not being able to be in front of somebody, talk to somebody. And there was not a thought in my head. It didn't even occur to me to talk to these people over Zoom. Didn't even occur to me. I wanted to be in their living rooms, in their offices. And I just wanted to create that. And I wanted this to be an experience in my life that I remembered. And that's what I needed to tell the kind of story that I wanted to tell. So I go into the prison and meet Andrew because I wanted to look in his eyes and see if I could believe him or not. I also wanted to experience what prison was. I'd never been to a prison before. I wanted to go into Andrew's childhood home and see where he grew up, because how can I describe that to the listener if I haven't been there? How can I ask his mother, Flora Hayes, to talk to me over the phone and hold her story and me be the one to tell it if I'm not sitting in front of her asking her? The day that I went to interview Flora, not only Flora was there, her husband was there. Andrew's sister, LaConda, his brother, D'Angelo, his son, Tamarian, 2 of his nephews, and 2 nieces, all spilled out of the house when I was only there to see Flora. How could I not have shown up for that? What would I have missed if I wouldn't have shown up in person? So I'll always do that. Always.
One of the most difficult situations we find ourselves in, those of us who cover cold and active cases, is how much to share about persons of interest. So I asked Stephanie about her approach.
So as a podcaster and investigator, the choice to go after a person of interest seems pretty simple, in my opinion. You do. However, I'm also a mother, and I'm also a wife, and I'm also a friend. So I can't do something recklessly. And I won't skirt around the issue. The person of interest's name is Sarah Lucas. And so I had to make the decision at a point, am I going to go after Sarah Lucas? Because I had gotten to the point in the story where I firmly believed Andrew was wrongfully convicted. The Innocence Project does not have the resources to go after the real killer. It's not their job. Their job is to get the wrongfully convicted person out. Most of the time, I've never seen a stat on it before, but I've got a bonus episode coming out that talks a little bit about it. The state rarely will go after the real killer after the wrongfully convicted person is exonerated because so many years have passed. I couldn't hear the recording that I heard of Sarah Lucas and see all the evidence and let it go and not go after her. So I did have to make the decision, how am I going to do this responsibly so I don't put myself in danger, but that I do go after the story. And I lined up several important things. I hired an investigator who would also act as security for me. And I had some layers of security to make sure that I was safe. But there was a point that there was no turning back for me in the story. And so if I was going to hunt for those responsible, I was going to do it and made that choice.
Who have you not spoken to yet that you'd like to speak to?
That's a great question. So I haven't spoken to many of Danny's family. And the reason that I haven't done that yet, and I haven't pushed that yet, one is the Innocence Project asked me to hold off on that because it is very traumatic to open all of this back up. And who am I to just waltz in and start saying this is what I'm doing? So I've been asked to hold off on the family for a while, and I have. Other than that, I've spent the last year really talking to everybody that I have wanted to, except I never found Danny's neighbors. He was left for dead for 2 months. And my question always is, in Memphis, not only is Memphis hot in the summer, there was a heat wave that summer. It was up to 110 degrees. So Danny was laying in his apartment dead for 2 months between August and October. And there's 1,000 units in that apartment complex and nobody smelled anything. Nobody detected anything. So I was never able to find any neighbors. So if there's anybody listening that lived in the Woodchase apartments in 2007 that would like to talk to me, I would love to know your experience during that time.
As we talked, I found myself thinking about episode 6 of Everything They Missed, The Years, which covered a lot of ground. Stephanie spoke with Flora Hayes and Tamarian, Andrew's son, about what his father's absence had meant for his life. Tamarian talked about how things might have been different if his father had been there, how he might not have struggled as much, how his talent for football might have gone further and taken him to college, and maybe even beyond. I was curious about how Stephanie processed those conversations with Andrew's family about the years that had been lost. And I also kept coming back to something more technical. Despite all the evidence that had been gathered for an appeals case, I was struck by a point that Stephanie had made early in the podcast, that DNA simply was not tested in the original investigation. So I wanted to know if there had been any updates on that front.
So I'll answer the second question, and then I want to go back to the Tamarian comment because your comments were so beautiful, and I so much appreciate you being able to recall all of that from pure memory because it's very meaningful. The DNA testing, the Innocence Project had pulled what they thought could be bloody fingerprints. And when they retested them, realized it wasn't blood, but it was some sort of fluid that they had used at the very beginning. Maybe not luminol, but something like luminol. As far as I know, there are things that can be tested. Will they be tested? I hope so. The Innocence Project has tried to test a couple of things, and I do believe that there's more to test. I believe that the DA's office should be the ones that just take that initiative and do it themselves. I don't think that it should be up to the Innocence Project to ask them to retest this stuff. So, I think that is where the media comes into play and is beneficial for cases like this to put pressure on the DA's office to just do the right thing and to go down and look in the storage and see if there's anything to test and just go ahead and test it. Take the initiative and do it yourself. The things you said about Tamarian is why the show is titled Everything They Missed. Because when you hear the beginning of the show, It's everything they missed as far as the detectives and the investigators and missing everything around Danny's crime scene and the suspects that they missed, the information that they missed, the subpoenas that they didn't follow through on that could have helped the case. But what you see in Tamarian and what you so beautifully said, it's everything he missed. It's everything he missed in his life. It's what happens when something like this occurs and the wrong person goes to jail, and it's the ripple effects of it. So it's everything Tamarian has missed in his life. And when I sat in that living room and met with him, that's what struck me. And I had already titled the show and not thought about that. So I think when people listen to it, I hope that you listen with ears of who missed what and how did that affect them.
Without telling us too much, because this is an active investigation both on your side and on the side of officials, where are we headed?
So where we are headed is a bombshell. Where we are headed is going to be the most exciting part of the case. And like you said, this case is happening in real time. So as we sit here, on the 19th of November, and I've written episodes 7 and 8, but I can't tell you what is going in episode 10. I can tell you what I think is going in episode 10. But the reason why we took a 2-month break is because we're waiting on court cases to happen, and we're waiting on some investigations to happen. 2 nights before we dropped the first episode, I get a message on X that completely changed the trajectory of the whole story. This person reached out over X and said, Stephanie, I want to know how many episodes of the show you're doing, and can I be on one of them? I never in a million years thought this person would reach out to me. My mind was blown. I froze. I didn't know what to do. I ended up calling that person that night. And the things that I was told, this person had never been talked to before in an interview style way. The angle that this person was coming at me was very scary and intimidating, to be honest. And so what has happened is what I thought the story was going to be about has completely changed. And things have happened over the course of several weeks that Andrew is still sitting in prison. But what has happened has given me so much hope that I didn't have before, that something not only good is going to happen from this, but that perhaps the responsible person will pay the price.
Episodes 1 through 6 of Everything They Missed are available now, and episodes 7 through 10 will be releasing soon, possibly by the time that you're hearing this. You can find Everything They Missed wherever you listen to podcasts. Stephanie's investigation is ongoing, and there's clearly much more of the story still to unfold. We'll be back with season 25 of The Fall Line in February, but we still have one more mid-season episode to share. An interview with Karen Binder, investigative genetic genealogist, regarding a current crisis in her field. If you know of a case that should be featured on The Fall Line, there's a link to our case submission form in the show notes. Thank you for listening. The Fall Line is an independent podcast, and we appreciate listener support. It allows us to do research, obtain FOIAs, pay our content advisors, and support and donate to the causes we care about. Our therapy fund is paid for through Patreon and Apple Premium subscriptions. If you try out the products we advertise, please use our sponsor codes. It really helps. And please take a moment to rate and review our show in your podcast app of choice. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please be sure to check your subscription to make sure that you're set for automatic downloads so you don't miss an episode. My book, Lay Them to Rest, is out everywhere. Find more through the link in our show notes. The Fall Line is written, hosted, and researched by Laura Norton. Interviews by Brooke Hargrove. Engineered and scored by Southern Gothic Media and Rachel Boyd. Content advisement by Vic Kennedy and Brandy C. Williams. Special thanks to Liz Lipka.